All right, a moment of clarity. I need you all to know and recognize that I am a white, heterosexual, Anglo-Saxon male of a certain age, which may explain part of this story. I grew up in rural Nevada around Reno and Sparks and Winnemucca, and my family was very prejudiced. They had every prejudice known to mankind at the time. I call it the smorgasbord. There was homophobia, xenophobia, sexism, racism, and anti-Semitism. And they taught that stuff to me through their language and through their actions. And what I got out of that was not anger, I got fear. I was afraid of anybody that was not like me. I was told, don't look at the person in the wheelchair. Don't engage that person. I was taught not to be friendly toward people who weren't exactly like me. And the funny part about that was that there weren't any people around there that weren't exactly like me, or hardly any. There may have been an Asian kid or two in school. I remember in high school there was one African-American girl. There weren't any other African Americans around. 7th and 8th grade, there was a gang of Mexicans that hung out on the corner, and they were like all cousins, and they were kind of nasty to everybody. The biggest danger from those guys was they spit on you when you walked by. So, and I had a friend when I was about 3rd or 4th grade. He was a Native American. His name was Pee Wee, and he and I loved to play cowboys and Indians, and guess what part I got? I got to be the Indian. I got to ambush him from behind the rocks all the time, but he always won. So anyway, I'm about 20, 21 years old, and I had been insulated so much from the cultural diversity in America, and then I joined the Army and found myself in Fort Polk, Louisiana, in 1966. I was a squad leader, so I shared a room with 3 other guys, and one of those guys was African American, and he was very good friends with another guy in that room. They grew up together in Louisiana. So I had my first little eye-opening about race and culture. And I actually visited with him. It's probably the first African-American person I ever visited with. I heard my first Pollock joke when I was in basic training, and you know what? I had to ask somebody what a Pollock was. I met some Jewish kids in basic training, and the only thing I can say about those kids was they talked funny. Well, the reason they talked funny is because they were from New York, and I'd never been out of Reno, so I'd never heard many accidents. Probably the closest thing to racial tension that I've ever experienced in my life, which instilled a little fear in me, is I was in Vietnam. I was a duty officer, and my job was to drive around the Army airfield at night and inspect different things. And one of the things I had to inspect was the theater, which was an amphitheater outdoors. And I drove up in my Jeep and I shined the light in there, and there were probably 50 or 60 African-American men in there. So, doing what I was supposed to do, I got out of the Jeep, I wandered over, and as I walked up, one of the men stepped out of the crowd, and he walked up to me and he said, "Sir, I think the best policy for you right now is to turn around, get back in your Jeep, and drive on out of here," which I did. And, you know, I don't know, they might have been having a Black Panther meeting, 1970, racial tensions were high. I kind of think they were probably smoking pot and didn't want to share. So after Vietnam, you know, I ended up as a meat cutter up in Winnemucca, Nevada, and one of the guys who used to come in and buy meat scraps from me to feed his hogs all the time was African American. And I got to know him pretty well, and we visited, and he told me about his family, and I was very, very comfortable around him. Later on, I ended up in Los Angeles, and I had my first gay relationship. Or rather, I should say, my first gay friendship. I met this guy. We started walking around together at noon for exercise, and after 2 or 3 months, he came out to me. And he invited me over to have dinner with he and his partner, and I did, and we had a great time. And then the friendship sort of dissolved after that, because I had moved away and one thing and another. And, you know, I often ask myself, would I have liked him? Would I have behaved the same way had he told me he was gay when we first met? I really don't know the answer to that, but I hope that I would not have acted any different than I did, finding out he was gay later. short period of time after that, I had a friendship with an African American. Actually, he wasn't African American. He was very quick to point out he was from Montserrat, a British subject, with a black man. And we had absolutely nothing in common. He was 20, I was in my 40s. He liked one kind of music, I liked another, but somehow or the other, we got to be great friends, and I'm happy to say that we're still friends today, only on Facebook, but still, we do chat occasionally. One of the things that happened with him is he and I were on our way to Las Vegas, and we stopped in Victorville in an In-N-Out Burger, and we were in line, and I felt him pushing right up behind me. And I turned around and I said, "What in the heck are you doing?" He says, "Take a look around, Dudley. I feel like a chocolate chip in a batch of white cookie dough." And I looked around the restaurant, and he was the only black guy in there. And I got my first taste of what it felt like to be an extreme minority and to feel the fear that they must feel. I also worked with a guy on a craps table in Las Vegas who was African American, and he told me that he'd gotten a basketball scholarship to a university in Utah. He came home after 3 weeks because he was such a minority there, it scared him to death. And he really had a tough time dealing with it. So, one of the things I'd like you to know right now is I have not always been the wonderful, diversity-loving person that you see before you today. I grew up like I told you I did, and on my very first date with my wonderful wife, who I've been married to for 26 years over here, we were riding our bikes down Santa Monica Beach in Venice Beach. And there was a black and a white guy kissing each other on the beach, and I made a homophobic remark. And my not yet wife then looked at me and she said, "You know, Dudley, you might want to be a little bit careful about who you're talking to when you say things like that." A little while later, she informed me that her best friend from high school was a gay guy, and if our relationship was going to continue to flourish, perhaps I should be friends with him also and change the way I talked and acted. I also made a disparaging remark about Native Americans around about that time, and she raised her eyebrow at me and she said, "What did you say?" And so I've learned a lot of things like that from my wife over the last 26 years, who has always called me on my shit when I spouted it out like that, and I'm very, very grateful to her for having done that. My cousin died of AIDS in the late 80s. He had moved off from high school to California and gone to college and lived in California, and I just assumed it was because he liked it there, and the reality was is he didn't want to come out and Winnemucca, Nevada, and if I was gay, I wouldn't want to come out in Winnemucca, Nevada either. And he died of AIDS, and I was really, really sad. And I wasn't sad because I found out that he was gay. I was sad because a person I really liked had died, and of AIDS. Shortly after that, I moved to Flagstaff, and I found myself involved in AIDS outreach. And I got to know a lot of gay and lesbian people during that time, and I'm very happy to say that a lot of those people are still friends of mine today. Most recently, my wife and I have made friends with a young couple, a couple roughly half my age, and turns out that he is transsexual. She identifies herself, because I asked her the other day, as queer. And so we are having this conversation about what it is to be like life is like when you're transsexual or queer. And it's really, really interesting. And we are great friends. And I like to say we have nothing in common and we have everything in common. She and I are both cooks, and we love sharing recipes, and I had a cold a while back, and she brought soup to me and everything like that, and we take stuff to them when they're ill. We all shared our same dietary concerns, so we cook alike, and we hang out together, and we watch movies. And the reality is though we have nothing in common, I believe we have everything in common because we are interested, truly interested in each other. So that kind of brings me up to where am I today? Who am I today as Dudley? On the one hand, I could say I'm enlightened. Wouldn't that be kind of arrogant for me to stand here and say I'm enlightened? I know I can have moments of enlightenment, but I really think enlightened is not a good term. I could say I'm colorblind. That would mean I see everyone in this room is exactly the same. And I can tell you right now, you're not. You're all wonderfully, beautifully different. So a couple weeks ago, I read an interview with Natalie Portman, and she was talking about diversity. And what Natalie said was, if you find yourself in a room and everyone is exactly like you, leave the room or change the room. Seek out diversity. Find people that are different than you. Be curious about them. Get them to know them. And finally, I recently watched a TED Talk by a wonderful human rights activist named Valerie Kaur. And what she said, and what I took to my heart, and what I want to share with you now, is that each of you is a part of me that I haven't yet met. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudley. One more time, you guys.